Have you ever wanted to make your miniatures look as good as the box art? This video is for you. So, in this video, we are going to go through everything it takes to paint Emberwatch using the box artist guidance with very basic techniques and a very basic process. I want to make it as easy as possible for you to get beautifully painted models onto the tabletop to game with. So, the first thing that we need to do is prime these models. Priming is something that we do to ensure that the paint adheres really well to the models. First thing we have absolutely got to do here is shake the rattle can. In order to lay down the primer, we're going to do smooth, even passes back and forth with the rattle can, starting the spray off to one side, making a nice light pass over the models and releasing, and doing this several times. The way that I do this is I will lay all of the models on a piece of cardboard flat on their fronts, do passes from all four directions, then flip them over and do the same thing again. Once we're done priming our models, we're ready to start painting. Now there are a few things we're going to need here. First one that I show here is optional. It's a painting handle. The reason for this is to reduce how much we're handling the models. When we touch our models, we deposit some oils on them from our skin, and that can interfere with paint adherence. Next up is a cup of paint water, and then possibly most importantly is what is called a wet palette. Now I have just a little tray here with some folded up tissue paper. I add enough water to completely soak the tissue, but not so much that there's a load of water slopping around in the bottom of this tray. Onto this, I'm going to place a square of parchment paper. In this case, I got some pre-cut ones for burger patties from the dollar store. Works really nicely. You can use Reynolds parchment paper and cut it up yourself if you want, but this was pretty cheap and it's really handy just for grabbing and putting a fresh parchment paper on it. Now, this is what we're going to put our paint on. So the idea of this setup is acrylic paint dries quite quickly. Putting acrylic paint onto this will allow for some of that moisture from the tissue paper underneath to come up through the parchment paper and keep the paint hydrated, stop it from drying out so quickly. It gives us more time to work with the paint. Next, we are going to need a brush. I use a size 4 Rosemary & Co. Series 33 Kolinsky Sable brush, but any brush that has a really good point to it. You want the largest paintbrush you are comfortable with, because that is going to give you the quickest coverage whilst retaining some precision. I also have a tile here that I use as a dry palette. This is used for instances where we don't want very wet paint. Speaking of not wanting very wet paint, let's talk about Zenithal. Zenithal is a means of highlighting a model very, very quickly, very, very simply, either by spraying a lighter color over a darker color, or in this case, dry brushing. So, in order to do this, we want quite a dry paint. I've got some gray, which I'm going to start with, and I'm going to use a dry brush. You can use a makeup brush. You just want a broadhead, soft brush for this. You're going to add some gray into the brush, and then wipe off almost all of the excess. You can test on your hand if you've got enough paint on the brush or if you've got too much. And then just in gentle downward strokes all across the model, we are going to apply that color. We don't want to fully cover the model. We're not looking to fill the recesses, but we're looking to get good coverage. Once we've done this with the grey, we're going to get some white. I have heavy-bodied acrylic titanium white just from the art store that I use for this, but any white will do. And it's the exact same process, a little more selective, a little less paint in the brush, so that we're really just picking out those brightest points. Quickly, before we dive into the rest of this paint job, if this is interesting to you, if you are enjoying the content, please consider liking the video, subscribe, hit that notification icon. Those things are super helpful for helping me grow as a channel, and it is just a way for me to reach more people and continue sharing this hobby. If you like it or you don't like it, or you have something to contribute, why not just put something in the comments and let me know your thoughts. I respond to every comment I see. I really appreciate people who take the time to write something into the comments, so that's another nice thing to do. Alright, back to the painting. Now, when painting, traditionally the recommendation is to start with the most recessed areas and work to the most outward areas. This will generally mean starting with the face and skin tones, then hitting clothes, then hitting any armor over clothes, then hitting things like capes and accessories right at the end. The reason for this is it's harder to reach those most recessed areas, and so you're more likely to accidentally paint onto other areas. Only really one of these models has much in the way of a face, but we're going to start with the face and hair here. It is the area that people will look at when they really, examine your models, and so you want it to look really good. We are starting with quite a dark base coat here to give us a good solid coverage and to allow us to cheat a little bit in our blends. We're not going to have to spend quite so much time getting a nice smooth gradient between areas, because this darker color is going to have given us our shadows already. Yes, we are erasing the Zenithal that we had applied right at the beginning, but that's okay. The Zenithal was there to give us a mental roadmap, to tell us what areas are more pronounced, what areas we should make brighter. So we're just going to keep that in mind as we paint, and we've got everything around it that's still showing at Zenithal to give us some context here. Now, I started with a Vallejo chocolate brown for this base coat. Matching the box art here, we're going to go with a primarily Caucasian skin tone. So this color is really going to just act as the shadow color. From here, we're going to take some Army Painter Ruby Skin, and we're going to use that to cover over most areas of the face here. We want to leave a few recessed areas in shadow, particularly under the eyes, the creases below the nose, and under the chin, creases in the ear as well. But most of the model is going to get covered over with this ruby skin tone. It's going to take a couple coats to do this, to get a nice smooth coverage. There's no rush here. As I said, the face is the most important part of the model to make it look really stunning. So let's take some time to really work at it. With the ruby skin down, we're going to start moving up in brightness, and for this we are going to use opal skin, another Army Painter paint. These just happen to be the paints that I had to hand. I'm not particularly attached to any one manufacturer of paints. Other paint lines will work just as well. Now, for this brighter zone, we really want to focus in on those areas that are going to catch a lot of light. That is going to be the tops of the cheekbones, it's going to be the tip of the nose, it is going to be the forehead, the lips and the chin. Those are the areas we really want to focus on with this. Once we've done that, we want to paint up the eyes. And here I'm using some of that opal skin mixed with some titanium white. I want quite a thick paint here. I don't want to run the risk of the paint bleeding out as I paint up. You'll see that I had left the eye socket dark, and that gives us framing for the eyeball. So we're going to just paint this in very, very carefully. If we hit any issues at all, if we paint it too fat or in the wrong place, not a problem. We just go back in with our chocolate brown or our dark shadow color, block it out and go again. You'll see I actually did redo the model's left eye because the first time I did it I wasn't happy with how the white was going. With the white in place, let it dry. You really don't want to rush this step. The next thing to do is to paint the iris, the pupil. We're just going to use a little bit of the chocolate brown mixed with some black. We don't want pure black for this, it tends to look a little comic book. And we want this to cover about 2/3 of the surface of the eye. For the hair, I didn't spend a lot of time on this. I just did a quick base coat of black and then a few touched edge highlights here with a grey. The same grey that we used in the Zenithal stage. Next up, we're painting the armour. Now, I don't often paint true metallic metals. I prefer a non-metallic metal look myself. But in the spirit of matching the artwork of this piece, we are going to do a little bit of true metallic paintwork. I use my dry palette for true metallics. This helps keep the paint consistent. It stops it thinning too much and having low coverage. It also keeps it separate from my wet palette and prevents metallic flakes bleeding into my paints. We start with scale color Elven Gold. We're going to paint this on in a couple of coats to get good coverage. Again, we are going to be losing a lot of the shadows that we had put in through the Zenithal Prime, but that's okay. We're going to come back over this and shadow it down and highlight it up. So we will bring that contrast back in. For shading the color down, I am using a thinned Gore Grunter Fur contrast paint from Citadel Color. This is a translucent paint. I am using it a little bit like a wash, but with more careful application. I'm really only painting this into the shadowed areas, and those areas are recesses under curved areas, as well as any crevices that are carved or sculpted into the armor. I have thinned this quite a lot with some water, and I'm applying it very specifically. I'm not just broadly painting it onto the model. To highlight up the armor, we want to use a really bright color. And in this case, I am using Speed Metal from Scale Color. It is almost a metallic white. It's very, very bright. And we're just using it very selectively on the most raised areas. Okay, now on to the cape. This is the biggest part of the model in a lot of ways. It's a lot of surface area. It's got big, broad folds, so it's going to take a little bit of care in painting this up. I have started with a base coat of Triumphant Navy from Army Painter, which is a nice, rich, dark blue that I happen to have. And I am adding a magic blue next to it on the brighter areas. So this is definitely not needed, this step. You can kind of layer up as you would, if you were following a typical Games Workshop tutorial. But I thought I would show you something a little different on a sculpt that really lends itself to it, and that is wet blending. So what I've done here is I've applied both paints on, and whilst they're still wet, I am using my brush just to gently blur the transition line between the two. Okay, so paint one color, quickly rinse your brush, paint the other color, and then rinse your brush again, dry it with a moderately dry brush. You're then going to just go back in and soften the edge between them by running the brush down it. You have to be careful and you have to be quick. But if it all goes wrong, don't worry, just paint over it again, and if needed, go back to layering. For the inside of the cape, I actually have to go through a few layers here. I start with heavy skin tone, which is a Vallejo game color with extra opacity paint. Paint that over the black to give myself a fairly light brown. Over that, I paint Tuscan Tan, a paint from Huge Miniatures, which I have. This is brightening it further. You'll notice that I don't actually paint this over the whole surface of the model. The most recessed areas I leave as that heavy body skin tone. And then finally, once I've got a good strong coat of Tuscan Tan, which took a few layers, I bring it up further with some titanium white. So this is pure layering at work here. We're just building up those layers over time and getting nice smooth coverage at each stage. No need for washes, no need for speed paints, just building this up as carefully and as quickly as we can. Lastly, these models have fur capes. Looking at the box art, these are painted a kind of brown, but with quite strong highlights. For this, I get that Gore-Grunter fur that I used for shading my armor. Bring that back out, thin it, not as aggressively as I did for the armor, but thinning it a little bit so that it will mostly sit in the recesses and only lightly color the fur itself. And just simply paint a layer of it over the fur. The fur has such pronounced texture that just doing this one layer will give us a high degree of contrast. You can adjust your thickness depending on where on the model it is. So you'll see on some of these figures that I have used a thinner mix of this paint on the more raised areas to give the impression of highlights. Well, with the model itself mostly finished, let's take a break and move to the base of the model. We've already got a Zenithal prime over it, and that's actually giving us really good color for the rocks. We want to get the ground cover in place, however. For this, I'm just painting over with a AK Interactive paint called Dunkelbraun, but really any kind of brown paint will work for this. You'll see that I actually apply the paint straight onto the base of the model. We've got a big surface, it's going to take a lot of paint to cover it, and the model has a lot of texture already pre-sculpted into the base, which makes it a little more forgiving. So I just add some paint and then carefully spread it out, leaving the area directly under the model a little bit darker, thinning the paint a bit and ensuring that we've kind of got that cast shadow from the model. We then want to bring out the texture a little bit more, so we use a dry brush, this time of the same Tuscan tan that we used for the inside of the cloak, and just gently dry brush that, focusing mostly on the front of the model. And of course, you have to paint those base runs. So a quick bit of Mars Black heavy body acrylic paint, just a couple laps slightly thinned around the outside of the base to give us that nice clean black look. In addition to the gold armor, these models have some silver areas to them. The swords, trim on the crossbows. We are going to paint those also in true metallic metal, and for this I am using scale color heavy metal as the first pass. This is a very dark silver, like a gunmetal kind of color. This gives us a good base, and then onto this I am going to add some speed metal in exactly the same way as I did for the armor, just to brighten up certain areas of it and help pick it out. Finally is what I like to call the bells and whistles. This is the accessories, it's the little bits of trim, and when I am painting these, I will generally try and reuse paints that I have used on the rest of the model as much as possible. Occasionally I will want one of these things to kind of pop a little bit more and I'll use something different. But buckles and rivets I paint with speed metal. Any straps that I've not already painted are going to get Gore-Grunter fur contrast paint over them. The strings for the crossbows are just going to be painted Tuscan tan. And with those colors painted up, we are finished. Well, this is my first painting tutorial on this channel in a little while. If you enjoyed it, please like the video, please subscribe. If you've got any feedback at all, please throw that in the comments below. I will be back next week painting up Zicket and his tunnel pack. Again, I'm going to be looking to match the box art, but the techniques I'm going to be using for those are very, very different. So do dial back in for that one. And in the meantime, thanks for watching and later days.